In the entire history of software, there is a special and particularly painful category of failure, and it is not the failure of bad products. Bad products deserve to die. The truly tragic failures are the ones where the best product loses, all because the people who owned it kept making catastrophic decisions until there was almost nothing left to save. This is the story of a piece of software called Delphi. It was, by any honest technical measure, superior to Microsoft's very popular Visual Basic, the tool it was built to destroy. It should have won. It had the better engine, the better language, and a fanatical, devoted following. Instead, it spent the next 2 decades being fumbled, renamed, sold, spun off, and sold again by a company that seemed almost determined to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, until the tool that was supposed to conquer Windows development became a beloved ghost, kept alive by the sheer stubborn loyalty of the people who refused to let it go, while its owners barely did anything. This is the story of how you lose with the best hand at the table. Our story begins on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February 1995, when a company called Borland released the first version of a product it called Delphi or Delphi. Now, if you have watched our video on Borland, you will already know the company well. The scrappy giant killer that had humbled IBM and beaten Lotus in the Supreme Court. And you will know the name of the man at the heart of it, a quiet Danish genius named Anders Hillsberg, who had built Borland's legendary Turbo Pascal. Delphi was, in a sense, the accumulation of everything Hillsberg and Borland had learned, and it was aimed like a weapon at a single target. By 1995, the world of Windows software development had a king, and its name was Visual Basic. Visual Basic, which we have also covered on this channel, was Microsoft's revolutionary tool that had democratized Windows programming. It had turned millions of ordinary people into software developers by letting them drag buttons onto a form and wire them together with simple code. It was enormously, overwhelmingly popular, but among serious professional developers, Visual Basic had a reputation. Visual Basic was seen as easy but limited, friendly but slow, a tool for beginners and simple applications rather than for building serious, high-performance software. And the reason for that reputation came down to a deep technical truth about how Visual Basic actually worked. Visual Basic did not compile your program into fast, standalone machine code. Instead, it relied on a runtime, an interpreter, a layer of software that had to sit between your program and the computer, translating as it went, which made Visual Basic programs slower and forced you to ship that clunky runtime alongside everything you built. Delphi did something that, to the developers of the era, felt like magic. It gave you everything that was good about Visual Basic: the beautiful visual designer, the drag and drop components, the ability to build a working Windows application in minutes instead of months, and it married that ease of use to a proper, serious industrial strength foundation, because underneath that friendly visual surface, Delphi was built on Object Pascal, a real, elegant, full object-oriented programming language, and it compiled your code directly into fast native machine code, the same kind of high-performance executable that C and C++ programmers produced with far more pain and effort. A Delphi program was a single fast file that just ran, with no clunky interpreter dragging it down. Delphi, in other words, was the tool that finally let you have both things at once: the productivity of Visual Basic and the raw performance and power of a real compiled language with none of the compromises. For a professional developer in 1995, picking up Delphi for the first time felt like being handed a superpower, and the developers responded with something close to devotion. Delphi built one of the most loyal, passionate communities in the entire history of programming, and it earned that loyalty because it was, quite simply, a joy to use. It was fast to build with, it was fast to run, it produced clean, self-contained applications. Version 2 arrived in 1996 with full support of the new 32-bit Windows 95. Version 3 in 1997 added more power, and then the version that the faithful still speak of in hushed, reverent tones, Delphi 7 in 2002, the tool had reached a kind of perfection. Ask a long-time Delphi developer today what the greatest version was, and a huge number of them will not hesitate. Delphi 7, they will tell you, was the last great Delphi. Fast, stable, familiar, complete, the peak of the mountain. And that phrasing itself should tell you something, because when a community's favorite version is one released over 2 decades ago, it means that at some point after that, something went very, very wrong. What went wrong was not Microsoft, at least not directly. Borland was crushed by Microsoft's ruthlessness. Delphi was wounded again and again by its own owner's astonishing capacity for self-sabotage. The first and most infamous blunder came in 1998. Borland, for reasons that made a kind of desperate boardroom sense at the time and absolutely no sense to anyone who actually loved the product, decided that it no longer wanted to be Borland. The name Borland, one of the most beloved and respected brands in the entire developer world, a name that meant something to millions of programmers, was thrown away. The company renamed itself Inprise, an awkward, meaningless corporate sounding word meant to signal a pivot towards selling expensive enterprise software to large corporations rather than tools to individual developers. It was a catastrophic identity change. The developers, who were the company's heart and soul, suddenly found that the company they trusted had renamed itself into something they did not recognize. Delphi 4 shipped in 1998 under the new Inprise brand, and it shipped buggy, and the combination sent a clear and demoralizing message to the faithful. The company that made their favorite tool no longer seemed to care about them. Eventually, the company gave up entirely and changed its name back to Borland, but the trust was cracked and years of momentum had been squandered on a branding disaster. And while all of this self-inflicting chaos was unfolding, the ground beneath Delphi was shifting in a way that would prove far more dangerous than any rebrand, because Microsoft was building .NET. And here the ghost from our earlier stories returns, because the chief architect of Microsoft's new .NET framework and its flagship language, C# was none other than Anders Hillsberg, the very man who had created Turbo Pascal and Delphi in the first place, and who had left Borland for Microsoft in 1996. Sit with that cruelty of that for a moment. The man who built Delphi, the tool designed to beat Microsoft's development platform, was now inside Microsoft building the new development platform that would render his own creation obsolete. Delphi was about to be attacked by its own father. When .NET arrived, it changed the rules of the entire game. It became Microsoft's grand unified future, the official, heavily promoted, deeply integrated way to build software for Windows. And Borland, or Inprise, or whatever it was calling itself that year, was caught in an impossible position. It could not ignore .NET, so it tried to chase it. It bolted .NET support onto Delphi. It released Delphi 8 in 2003, targeting .NET, and in doing so, it stumbled again, because that version lost the very thing that had made Delphi special in the first place: its ability to produce fast, native Windows applications. Delphi found itself trying to be two things at once: the beloved native tool its community wanted, and a .NET tool competing on Microsoft's home turf against Microsoft's own products. And it did neither well enough to win. It was chasing its estranged creator's new platform, always a step behind, on a field that Microsoft owned completely. Delphi never recovered its former dominance, but it did not exactly die either, because it was far too good and far too deeply embedded in the software of thousands of businesses to simply vanish. But it faded from the center of the industry to the margins, and Borland's own priorities drifted away from the developer tools that had made it famous. And then came the final indignity, the slow dismemberment. In 2006, Borland decided it did not even want to be in the developer tools business anymore, the very business it had seen born to dominate. And it spun off its tools division, including Delphi, into a separate subsidiary called CodeGear. And 2 years later, in 2008, it sold CodeGear off entirely to a company called Embarcadero Technologies. And the price is the part that stings the most. The software that had once made Borland the third largest software company in the world was sold for around $23 million. It was a fire sale price, a final quiet admission of just how far the mighty had fallen. And yet, here's the part of the story that lifts it out of pure tragedy and into something almost miraculous, because Delphi did not end there. It should have. By every normal rule of how software dies, when a tool loses its dominance, gets fumbled by its owner, chases a rival's platform, and finally sold off for scraps, it is supposed to quietly disappear, mourned by a shrinking handful of holdouts until the last of them retires. But this is not what happened to Delphi, and the reason it did not is the reason this whole story story is worth telling. Delphi survived because its community would not let it die. The devotion those developers had formed back in the golden days of the 1990s turned out to be one of the most durable forces in all of software. Under Ambassadero, Delphi kept going. It got Unicode support. It got the ability to build applications not just for Windows but for macOS and for Linux, including Android and iPhone. It was truly cross-platform. Today, more than 30 years after that Valentine's Day launch in 1995, Delphi is still here, still building real software for real companies, kept alive by a community whose loyalty simply refused to expire. And so we are left with the hardest lesson. Being the best is not enough. Delphi was faster than Visual Basic, it was more powerful than Visual Basic, and Visual Basic, the slower, simpler, more limited tool, went on to become one of the most widely used programming languages in the history of the world, while Delphi, the superior product, was left fighting for survival on the fringes. It did not lose because it was worse. It lost because Delphi's own company spent its most precious years renaming itself, chasing its rival, and selling off its own future one piece at a time, while the man who had given it life went to work for the enemy and built the thing that would replace it, and that in the end may be the saddest ending of all. Thank you for watching.